The waters of the Pacific were calm once more. The smoke that had blackened the horizon in early June 1942 slowly dispersed, leaving behind twisted wreckage and drifting oil. Beneath those waves lay the remains of 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, and with them, the dreams of Japanese naval supremacy. For the Americans, Midway was not the end of the war. It was the beginning of a new phase. The victory that had seemed impossible after Pearl Harbor had become a reality. Yet few among those who fought would have imagined how profoundly this single battle would alter the course of history. In the days that followed, survivors were rescued from the sea. Burned, wounded, and exhausted, they told stories of courage, terror, and endurance. The sailors of the Yorktown, which had been abandoned after sustaining heavy damage, watched as their beloved ship finally slipped beneath the surface on June 7, 1942. Even in defeat, the carrier seemed to die heroically, taking with her the spirit of the men who had kept her afloat until the very end. On Midway Atoll itself, the defenders took stock of the aftermath. Craters pocked the sand, airfields were damaged, and oil tanks still smoldered. Yet the American flag continued to fly. For the first time in the Pacific War, the United States had decisively turned back a major Japanese offensive. News of the victory spread rapidly, first through coded naval reports, and then across the globe. For months, Allied forces had been on the defensive, from Europe to the Pacific. The headlines that now filled newspapers across America carried words of triumph. U.S. Navy deals crushing blow at Midway. 4 Jap carriers sunk. Families who had prayed for their sons, brothers, and fathers finally had reason to hope. In factories, offices, and small towns, the victory lifted morale to heights unseen since the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Japanese, who had once seemed unstoppable, were now vulnerable. In Tokyo, however, the atmosphere was one of stunned disbelief. The Imperial Navy had never before suffered such catastrophic losses. Official announcements minimized the scale of the defeat, but within the military, the truth was clear. Japan's expansion had reached its limit. Admiral Yamamoto accepted responsibility. "The tide has turned," he confessed quietly to his staff. "We will never again regain the initiative." Admiral Chester Nimitz wasted no time capitalizing on the victory. The U.S. Navy began reinforcing Midway Atoll, repairing runways and expanding defenses. Supply ships arrived, bringing construction crews and fresh troops. The tiny island, once a vulnerable outpost, became a fortress guarding the Central Pacific. Meanwhile, American industry accelerated. Shipyards worked around the clock, producing new carriers, aircraft, and destroyers. The lessons of Midway were quickly absorbed. Intelligence, air power, and flexibility had triumphed over rigid planning and overconfidence. The codebreakers who had predicted the attack, led by Joseph Rochefort, were finally recognized for their pivotal role. Though much of their work remained secret for decades, their success at deciphering Japanese messages had changed the war. For the Japanese, the aftermath was a period of quiet despair. Their 4 sunken carriers had represented the elite of their naval air power. Replacing ships was difficult enough. Replacing skilled pilots was nearly impossible. The men who had trained for years in specialized tactics were gone, and their loss would haunt every future operation. In the months after Midway, Japan attempted to reorganize. Admiral Yamamoto launched new operations in the Solomon Islands and at Guadalcanal, but now the Americans were no longer reacting. They were advancing. Each engagement further drained Japan's dwindling resources. Oil was scarce, pilots inexperienced, and morale eroded. Midway had broken not just ships, but the very backbone of the Japanese offensive. Amid the grand strategies and political consequences, individual acts of heroism stood out. Ensign George Gay, the lone survivor of Torpedo Squadron 8, became a national hero. His first-hand account of the battle gave America a personal connection to the events at sea. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, whose squadron found and attacked the Japanese carriers at the critical moment, received the Navy Cross for his bravery and leadership. Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance and Admiral Chester Nimitz were hailed as the architects of victory, their calm judgment preventing unnecessary losses while ensuring success. The men of Midway were ordinary Americans, farmers' sons, mechanics, students, thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Their courage defined a generation. Military historians would later debate every detail of the battle, from tactics to timing, but all agreed on one thing. Midway was the turning point of the Pacific War. Before June 1942, Japan held the initiative, expanding rapidly across the Pacific. After Midway, the balance shifted irreversibly. The United States, buoyed by industrial strength and renewed confidence, launched a series of counteroffensives, first at Guadalcanal, then across the Solomon Islands, and eventually toward the Philippines and Japan itself. Each step carried echoes of Midway, lessons learned, strategies refined, and morale strengthened by the memory of that victory. For Japan, every campaign after Midway was defensive. Even their later tactical successes could not reverse the strategic decline. The loss of experienced aviators at Midway meant that their carriers, though rebuilt, were never as formidable again. Victory came with a cost. Thousands of young men had perished in the waters of the Pacific, American and Japanese alike. Many families received telegrams that began with the dreaded words, "We regret to inform you." In small American towns, gold stars appeared in windows, signifying sons who would never return. Survivors, haunted by the images of fire and falling comrades, carried emotional scars long after the war ended. George Gay would later write, "Midway wasn't just a battle. It was a test of every man's soul. We fought for survival, for revenge, and for the hope that someday the ocean would be calm again." Beyond ships and planes, Midway changed psychology. For months, the Allies had felt cornered, outmatched by an enemy that seemed to win every encounter. Midway shattered that illusion. The Japanese mystique of invincibility was gone, replaced by uncertainty and fear. The Americans, meanwhile, discovered that intelligence, courage, and innovation could overcome numerical disadvantage. The belief that the Pacific could be retaken became real. In the words of Admiral Nimitz, Midway was not a miracle. It was the product of preparation, courage, and the will to fight on even when defeat seemed certain. In Japan, public knowledge of the loss was heavily censored. Newspapers printed vague reports of a naval engagement near Midway Atoll. Only within military circles was the full scale of the disaster understood. The emperor was informed in private, and the nation entered a somber period of reflection. Among the Japanese Navy, the defeat sparked internal conflict. Some officers blamed Yamamoto's overextension. Others blamed poor coordination and intelligence failures. Yet all recognized that America had achieved something extraordinary. Still, Yamamoto remained respected. His strategic brilliance was undiminished, even if fate had turned against him. Less than a year later, in 1943, his aircraft would be intercepted and shot down, an event made possible by the same American intelligence network that had predicted Midway. By the end of 1942, the Battle of Midway had become legend. It was studied in military academies, discussed in newspapers, and commemorated in ceremonies across the United States. The lessons were clear. Intelligence, wins wars. Without the cryptanalysts who broke Japanese codes, Midway might have been another Pearl Harbor. Air power rules the seas. Battleships had once been the pride of every navy, but Midway proved that aircraft carriers were now the true capital ships. Flexibility and courage matter most. The Americans adapted quickly under pressure, while the Japanese suffered from rigid tactics and delayed responses. In strategic terms, Midway marked the end of Japanese expansion and the beginning of Allied dominance. In human terms, it showed how bravery, sacrifice, and preparation could turn despair into hope. Years later, when veterans revisited Midway Atoll, they found a quiet island transformed into a wildlife refuge. Birds nested where guns had once stood, and coral reefs grew around the sunken ships below. The ocean had reclaimed its calm beauty, hiding the scars of battle beneath its shimmering surface. Yet those who remembered could still see the ghosts of June 1942, the smoke, the fire, and the young men who never returned. A memorial on the island reads simply, "They fought with courage. They died with honor. Their victory changed the world." The Battle of Midway remains one of the most remarkable victories in military history. It was not won by luck, but by preparation, courage, and intelligence. It was America's revenge for Pearl Harbor, but more than that, it was a statement that democracy and resilience could withstand tyranny and aggression. From the ashes of Midway rose a new kind of warfare, a new naval doctrine, and a new sense of American purpose. The Pacific Ocean, once dominated by Japan, became the pathway to final victory. As the sun set on that ocean in 1942, the world had changed forever.